So, lootable personal inventory in 315, and in the future possibly moving up to ships and things of that nature. Does this signal the beginning of a golden age of piracy? Is this when it becomes a real thing? In a word, no, not at all. There's a lot of there's a lot of people who tend to jump the gun on these things. Now, as far as personal inventory being lootable, is this going to increase ganking? I mean, it's possible, but basically you're talking about a full loot survival game with an unparalleled, size of world that people can occupy, that they can be lost in, and the population limit is still the population limit. So the further players spread out, the less likely encounters become. So, it just depends on bad luck, really, if you're the one who's getting looted. But in terms of ships and actual piracy, actual stealing of cargo and whatnot, like I'm going out here and I'm going to make a little cargo run. Really, you need not just like the ship explodes in space, there's a cargo container there or whatever. There are certain things we have, and there are certain things where the framework is there, but we don't know the particulars. So we have tractor beams in the form of a handheld tractor beam to move cargo around should that be needed. And chances are it probably is, because you can't really loot, a metric ton of cargo into your personal inventory and then dump it out in your ship. It's not realistic. So chances are you're going to need either a heavier tractor beam, or you're going to need ships to drop large cargo containers that you can tractor beam into your ship and then sort out from there. Beyond that, you also need a black market. Now, we do have the foundation of a black market at many of the salvage yards, and I believe it's Crusader L4. Correct me in the comments below. There is a black market terminal there as well, and there more than likely is going to be one in Grim Hex. We have those things there, but what kind of prices are you going to gain for the goods? How much are you going to lose trying to fence those goods in system? Chances are maybe that if you're looting, like I'm going out to get booze and food with my cargo ship right now, if you loot all this, chances are you probably get a fairly decent price for them in a system like Pyro that resource-wise has been largely wiped out, where a lot of the things they need to make stuff like this may not be there, may not be readily available, or the infrastructure may just not be there to support it. So you might get more money there, and the money is an important thing. You might think, oh, that's an afterthought, but really it's what makes piracy worthwhile in the first place, right? Like if I can go out and I can do kill missions for Vaughn, and I can just be punching those out with relative impunity and making money that way, then why would I go out and pirate other than just, the interest of doing it once or twice to see how it works and then going, well, but the money's not there yet. It's not really worth my time. And that is also kind of a limiting factor on that behavior. Some people will do it just to figure out the tactics and get the idea, figure out the beats. How does it work? How do I make it work better? And then set it aside because it's not really profitable. Other people may kind of go whole hog into it, knowing that the money doesn't really count, the money isn't really important. But ultimately, is it worth your time? And for some people it will be. For others it'll be like, no, we haven't crossed that line. I think that there's going to definitely be a surge when this becomes possible, but ultimately what is going to make it sustainable and what is going to make it, a thing that from this point on is now a part of, the day in and day out life of Star Citizen. There's going to be other factors that kind of make that what it is going to be. that is going to make that worthwhile. So it's like a lot of the features in Star Citizen, right? You know, we get a new feature in the game, we're like, oh cool, it's a new feature, but all the other stuff that actually makes that feature interesting, that makes that feature work, just aren't there yet. And so you're like, oh well, you know, at some point it'll be worthwhile. It's kind of like owning a Herald or a Reclaimer. It's like, oh hey, it's a cool ship to fly, and at some point it's going to do something, right? And so rating personal inventory, I don't really think is going to deliver big changes, and I don't think the first instances of rating a ship's inventory are really going to bring about big changes in that regard, though I wonder what effect it'll have on the psychology of the community and their perception of, you know, open world PvP and full loot in Star Citizen. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. There's a very interesting video, I believe it's done by Josh Strife Hayes, when he talks about open world kind of full loot MMOs and kind of the hype and then the reality of them. And it's a very interesting watch. It's a very good video. And it kind of deals with, you know, the kind of, oh yeah, this is going to be great. This is going to be exactly the game that I want. And then it turns out not to be in a lot of cases. So I'm going to watch this with a lot of interest to see how the community reacts to this when it becomes a reality. The perception of it is definitely going to be interesting, and to see if the perception shifts. You know, we've talked about this in the past where we've talked about being able to just pull items out of thin air and put them on your character, put them on your ship. And now that is going to cease to be a reality, right? You're going to pick a home base when you first log into the game. And I was a little bit disappointed to see that your choices were Orison, you know, Hurston and Arcorp and New Babbage. I believe those were the 4 choices. I don't believe Grimhex is in there, which is going to make things very, very interesting for pirates. Because the first thing you're going to have to do is probably load up a big ship with all your stuff and take it to where you plan to actually, you know, have your home, and then start ferrying ships over as well. I don't know how well that is going to be received in its initial implementation. I know that originally we could spawn at Grimhex. That was one of our choices, and then that choice was kind of taken away. And I always kind of suspected that as they were adding the new landing sites, they didn't want new players to get in and accidentally pick the landing site that they didn't feel showcased the game the best. And, you know, that being Grimhex, which is, I mean, it's seen some improvements, but it's definitely had its rough patches as well. And I always kind of suspected that that's why Grimhex was no longer on the list, though I'm sure that there's a gameplay reason for it too. I'm sure there's some kind of explanation. But, you know, I kind of suspect that was at least a strong influence in that decision. But when players are now faced with this inconvenience and faced with this reality, you know, this is, again, one of these things that's going to make players go like, fighters, ouch, maybe not. You know, so that is going to be another interesting one to watch. And I think that, you know, if we could ever get to see what per unit was sold during an anniversary sale, I think after 315 drops, you might be able to see that, oh, X amount of players melted X amount of fighters and stepped up into the big boys. And you see things like Redeemers and Corsairs and Constellations getting sold en masse. I think that those ships are really going to kind of go gangbusters. That you're going to see a lot of people stepping into those bigger things that can carry your personal inventory, or at least help you ferry your personal inventory to distant locations. You're probably also going to see a lot of consolidation. I know that myself and some of you who watch this channel have practiced a little bit of narrowing down of the ships that you own, moving away from a lot of cheaper ships to 3 or 4 bigger ships, or however you arranged your account. And I think that that is going to be a trend that picks up a lot of momentum in the wider community as we move forward, and as these kind of new realities, which were always like, these ideas are, I'm sure Chris will change that. Chris told me he was going to change that. I met him at a CitizenCon 5 years ago, and I'm pretty sure he said that he was going to, change that in the future. Don't worry. No, he didn't. And you were drunk, and that wasn't Chris. When these realities really sink in, it's going to be interesting to see how people's perception of ships change. And I really do think that, personal inventory isn't going to set off an age of piracy, but it is going to set off an age of reality coming sharply into focus for a lot of people. It's going to cease to be this kind of, conceptual idea, and it's going to become a practical, real thing that you have to deal with in the moment. It's one of those objective realities of the battlefield that you have to acknowledge now. And it's going to be very interesting to watch how players deal with that, because obviously some people are not going to deal with this at all. They're just going to be like, no, get rid of it. I don't like it. I don't want this anymore. And that is kind of one of the problems of having this system in the game for as long as we did. Is it became ingrained into people's decision-making process. It became just the way the world was. And I always I always warned against that. And I was always like, get rid of this. Get rid of it now. Like, do whatever you have to do to get rid of it, because it creates a familiarity or an expectation that this is something that's going to continue, and obviously it's not something that is going to continue. And so that kind of concerns me in how the community is going to react to it, because there's obviously going to be backlash, because it's not real until it becomes real with some people. They can't really, they can't step into that, this is what it's going to be in the future. They need to be in that moment to finally go like, oh yeah, this is a real thing. So that, I think, is what we're going to see come out of this, is, people now who have been denying reality are going to have to cope with reality. And so CitizenCon and 315 launching, maybe not so much, but when we get to the anniversary sale, I think you're going to see some very interesting shifts in the ships that are out there. And a lot of ships that were kind of touted as, like, oh, this is the dream ship, or oh, this is the ship that you have to have. You got to get this ship. And now it's going to be like, no, it's not great when you're faced with these problems. And I know that some people will like, oh no, the Gladius, it has cargo on it now. You can put a gun in there. You can put a little ammunition in there too. It's not going to be enough. It's nowhere close. Can you imagine being in a Gladius and having to ferry your different armors for different temperatures, your different guns? What do you want? Do you want silence? Do you want long range? Do you want short range? Do you want a shotgun? Do you want a missile launcher? Whatever. A light machine gun, and having to one by one ferry these things across in a Gladius? No. People aren't going to do that. They're going to start going like, ooh, maybe as an interesting side ship, but not as my main ship. And so it's going to be very interesting to see, the community now having to, not try to imagine what it's going to be like, but then to be, to now be stuck in the middle of it. And this is the way that it is now. Very interesting. It's potentially going to be very funny as well. Though, I mean, you shouldn't always laugh at other people's misfortunes. Though I do have to admit, the Argo Cargo thing, I stayed out of it. I did not say a word, but now that it's done, like, I was just laughing because, I mean, it was an internet poll. Of course, tomfoolery would ensue. I'm seeing people's comments. I'm seeing how upset people are getting about it. And I was like, have you not seen the Internet Historian's video, Any Poll's a Goal? Which, by the way, if you haven't seen that, totally worth the watch. Absolutely, totally worth the watch. Hilarious. Taylor Swift being sent to a school for the deaf to put on a concert. Justin Bieber going to North Korea. All these internet polls that ended so hilariously. It's a great video to watch. But of course, you know, when you make a poll like that and you leave the Argo Cargo as one of the ships that you can choose, you're just begging for people to do that. So as much as people are like, oh, it's the internet trolls' fault. No, it's CIG for leaving stupid options in their poll that shouldn't have been there in the first place. But they're like, well, it's a ship and it's flyable, so it counts. So there it is. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this show, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.